Okay, good. Well, let's start. I want to move on since this is for Democracy Journal, which is not really a news outlet per se. It's an ideas outlet. So I want to talk to you about ideas and the state of our democracy. But let's start with some news because I'm sure everybody's curious about your thoughts on the COVID bill.
Well, to me, the COVID bill is the big answer to the assault on democracy on January 6th. I mean, what the right wing had to offer was a violent insurrection, an attack on Congress, an attempt to overthrow the election result and install a banana republic. And the Biden-Harris administration and the Democrats in Congress have gotten the government moving again and have restored the government as an instrument of the common good in the public interest, as opposed to being an instrument of private self-enrichment and division and polarization and corruption.
I was just telling people before you came on, watching the Rose Garden ceremony. Biden's remarks were pretty amazing, and his remarks and this whole process is as direct a refutation of Reaganomics and supply side economics and Milton Friedman economics as I've seen in this country in my adult lifetime. You think that's accurate?
Yes, it's a statement of popular government and a statement of popular economics, and the idea that people are sent into government as representatives, not to just go make war against the other team, but to actually deliver on the needs of the people.
I'm interested in your thoughts on the constraints going forward, obviously with respect to the Senate and how tough it is to get 50 votes on some things. There pretty clearly aren't 50 votes for a $15 minimum wage over there. How do you negotiate that? And do you think they're going to do anything about the filibuster?
Well, what was Churchill's line about how America can always be counted on to do the right thing once it's tried everything else first? I mean, I think it's going to take perhaps a string of some losses over in the Senate on things like the minimum wage, or maybe I don't want to hex anybody, so I don't know. There's some big stuff coming over there. We've done some great stuff already on COVID-19, on gun safety. There's legislation coming up on infrastructure, on climate change, on immigration, and let's hope we can get them all through. But if not, if the Republicans stay true to form and maintain that, the ideological homogeneity and rigidity of a religious cult, then it will take some filibuster reform, if not repeal.
Yeah. What do you think seems most likely to you?
Well, I heard Senator Manchin say that he continues to be a skeptic about getting rid of the filibuster, but he's at least open to the idea that if you're going to have a filibuster, it shouldn't be as easy as one senator out of 100 saying, I'm going to put a hold on that bill, and then the promised filibuster is enough to just vanquish any chance of passage. So he's suggesting you at least have to do a real stand and deliver filibuster, where you stay up all night and you explain why you're doing what you're doing, and you expose yourself to the wrath of the public. I mean, and I think that would be some incremental progress. The problem is that in the internet age, of course, you can imagine the Ted Cruz people loving an opportunity like that, because it would be a huge fundraising moment.
Yeah. And what about the House Democratic Caucus? You're together. There was the one vote, which I don't understand, by the way. Jared Golden, it's not that Republican a district. And it would seem to me that if I were him, I'd want to run in 2022 on having passed this good stuff.
But I was a little bit surprised at my friend Jared Golden in casting that vote. I don't know what the particular dynamics were in his district that led to that, but sometimes members will cast a contrarian vote just to show that they're not in the pocket of the leadership.
Right, right. But you have a pretty ideologically broad House caucus, but so far at caucus meetings, in your internal deliberations, things are reasonably calm.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the closeness of the margin puts all of us on our best behavior. But I'd also say that it's interesting to me that the New Deal, which has been an epithet for a long time. I mean, and I remember, when I was young, all of the politicians in the Democratic Party wanted to run against the New Deal. Like, it was sort of, Paul Tsongas, and, there were people who just said, well, I'm not a New Deal Democrat, I'm a New Democrat or whatever. That's kind of out the window. And it's restoring what the New Deal really was. It wasn't this comprehensive behemoth-like strategy that was put down. It was a series of improvisational efforts to address the needs of the country in a serious way. In that sense, it was the most pragmatic kind of politics that we've had, pragmatic in the Deweyan sense, in the William James sense of let's experiment with something and see if it works.
Okay, so now that you've invoked William James and Thomas Dewey or John Dewey, let's move. Let's take a high plane. In terms of the fate and condition of our republic, the needle's out of the red zone. Donald Trump's not the president, so things have relaxed on that front a bit, I guess. But how do you size it up right now?
I mean, I wish I could feel that, and maybe it's just those of us who were in the room on January 6th and those of us who weren't, because we came very close, Michael, to a real coup. I mean, Trump meant business when he said, "Don't be weak, show strength. You're not going to take your country back unless you show strength and go and fight like hell, or you're not going to have a country anymore." He meant it, and he's got a militia out there. That militia is still there. It's a tiny, tiny percentage of the overall American people. The vast majority of us reject that, but you can use the social media to mobilize a mob. I mean, that's what the framers were talking about. That's why I started off in the trial with Alexander Hamilton in Federalist One, who said, our major threat is going to be people who begin as demagogues and end as tyrants, all through the mobilization of the mob. So basically, I think that the fascist threat is still out there. It's certainly big enough that we can't turn away from it. But again, the strongest answer to it is what we're doing legislatively. We're showing that democratic government can work. Small d democratic government can work. And this is, and we're also doing the same thing on COVID-19. I mean, what a victory and triumph for science this is, and for scientific discovery and the medical sciences. What a great answer to all of the conspiracy theory and quack medical cures that Donald Trump was hawking, and all of the nonsense that comes out of the right wing that is kind of the parasitic commercial adjunct to what they're doing politically. People sell that nonsense.
Is the Republican Party still the party of Trump, still an authoritarian party?
But definitely the majority of it is, the vast majority of it is. We got 17 Republicans in the House and Senate together who voted for impeachment or for conviction, 10 in the House, 7 in the Senate. It was the most bipartisan impeachment and conviction move in American history. There've just been 4 that have gone to trial, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, the first Trump and the second Trump. And this was by far the most, the most bipartisan. But the truth is that the Republican Party today far more resembles an authoritarian religious cult and a cult of personality than it resembles a modern political party that you would find in a democracy.
Yeah. Uh, how might that be broken?
Well, believe me, I've ordered every book I can find on religious cults and getting
Yeah.
people out of them and deprogramming and the whole thing. I mean, they basically, I think, have the right strategy, which is that you have to be as warm and humane as possible with the people who are captive to the dogma, at the same time that you have to be absolutely crisp and directive about the truth and the facts against propaganda and lies.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be very direct and tough about refuting the big lie and all of the big lie, which continues to, drive Trump and his movement. But we have to reach out however we can to the people who are not totally lost to it.
Yeah. Do you think fascist or neo-fascist is too strong a word for some of the impulses that drive the party today?
No, it's not too strong a word at all. I mean, Madeleine Albright makes a really good point in her book where she says that, fascism is not a prescribed ideological program that has a specific content. It's just a strategy for power. Donald Trump, if nothing else, has a very specific lust for power that turns into particular strategies. And that's why partisanship doesn't quite capture the moment. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of, party thinking and sentiment that they try to get going. He makes a bizarre object for people's partisan adoration when he was a liberal Democrat. He was a right-wing Republican. He ran for president on the Reform Party ticket. He was an independent. And even now he's talking about, organizing this Patriots Party. So it goes from day to day. So the idea that they elevate him as a partisan hero is scary. I mean, he's really much more, he wants to be in the mold of a Mussolini kind of hero of a right-wing populist movement. But we challenged him to come and speak to us in Congress in his own impeachment trial. Yeah. And I think if anybody else in the country was falsely accused of having incited violent insurrection, they'd be the first person there at 7:00 in the morning to testify. But he gamely refused to come and dodged it. What a snowflake he is. I mean, if you really think you're leading some right-wing populist movement, come on out and tell everybody why you did the right thing in inciting insurrection against the Constitution and the government. And so he's a fraud and he's a coward the way that most bullies are.
Let me ask you this question, which I've thought a lot about in the Trump era. So the standard reason given for more Republicans not standing up to Trump is their terror at the base, right? They're terrified of offending his base. I accept that, but I also think that they don't mind so much what Trump does and stands for. They don't like the tweets, they find him embarrassing in this and that way, but they don't fundamentally object to his use/abuse of power. You think that's right? Or you think they're just afraid?
Well, maybe it's a 2/3, 1/3 thing. I mean, because the fear falls into two parts. I mean, one is the political fear that he can just steal the coalition right out from beneath them and run somebody in the primaries against them. So that's the main fear. But during the impeachment and the trial process, multiple Republican colleagues confided to us that they were just physically afraid. I mean, and rightfully so, with thousands of these people unleashed and tons of death threats and threats of violence all over the place. It begins to change your mode of thinking to have all of this violence surrounding you. Then that's a critical component of fascism too. So maybe that's 2/3, and a third of it is, that maybe they don't mind so much. There's a kind of no enemies on the right philosophy there. Well, who cares if it blends off into QAnon and the Ku Klux Klan and the Aryan Nations? That's like, what's it to them?
Yeah. You're a constitutional expert. So I want to ask you a bit about the Constitution. There's increasing talk and activity on the broad left about the choke points in the Constitution that make it hard to pass progressive legislation, but that defeat a democratic, a truly democratic system of government, the Electoral College and the nature of the Senate, and so on and so on.
Yes.
Just an open-ended question for starters, I guess. What is your critique of the Constitution, if you have one?
Well, I have the standard American progressive democratic critique of the Constitution, which is it did start with nothing like Lincoln's ideal in mind of government of the people, by the people, for the people, but it was a slave republic of Christian white male property owners over the age of 21. But it has been through this process of successive social struggle and political transformation and constitutional amendment that we have opened America up. So, you know, you can read all of the 17 amendments that we've had since the Bill of Rights as a chronicle of the expansion of democracy and the replacement of old-fashioned anti-democratic instruments with pro-democratic features. So, you know, the 13th Amendment, of course, abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment says equal protection, due process. The 15th Amendment gets rid of race discrimination in voting. 17th Amendment replaces the state legislature's selection of the U.S. senators with popular selection. The 19th Amendment gives us women's suffrage, and on and on and on, all the way through, you know, DC voting in presidential elections, the poll tax to lowering the voting age to 18. All of it's there. We just need to keep going. And so, you know, the gerrymandering of congressional districts is a critical part of Republican power today. And if we had honestly drawn districts, the Republicans would not have a prayer, which is why they oppose H.R. 1, which mandates independent redistricting commissions in every state in the union for federal elections. And so gerrymandering is there. The Electoral College has given us, you know, two popular vote losers in the last 6 elections, George W. Bush and Donald Trump, and also creates all of these opportunities for strategic mischief and corruption, as we just saw on January 6th. So we should be moving to a national popular vote for president as quickly as possible. At the very least, cleaning up all of the dangers that inhere in the current regime.
Subject of gerrymandering, of course, I agree, and I think everybody watching our conversation would agree. But let's take it a step further. There are a lot of people who say that the problem is the very existence, the very mandated existence of single-member districts. For the benefit of people who are watching this who may not know, we have single-member districts in the United States. It doesn't work that way in every democracy in the world. Many say it exacerbates polarization, and people are pushing, some of your colleagues, Don Beyer of Virginia most notably, pushing for a change to multi-member districts, which would not solve everything, obviously, but perhaps make for less polarization and less of that kind of gerrymandering. Are you with Don Beyer on that particular?
Yes, I mean, Don Beyer and I are like this on the issue, and you know, he's got legislation for multi-member districts. I've got legislation for ranked choice voting in every federal district in the country. They go hand in hand. They go together, and we need to be moving towards systems of proportional representation. I mean, the party that has 52% of the vote in your state should not get 100% of the seats. But it's very easy with the computer technology to draw the districts in such a way that the 52% party gets all of the seats, or gets all of them but one, and the 48% party gets 0, or it gets, you know, 1 out of 7 or 1 out of 8. And so there are a whole bunch of states where it's a complete lockout, you know, where you don't have Democrats coming from Arkansas and you don't have Republicans coming from Massachusetts, you know, despite the fact that there's a Republican governor up there. So we can do better than that. And the Democrats, including incumbent Democrats who may not benefit from this personally and individually, nonetheless are pushing it because as a matter of principle, it makes sense to have a Congress that looks a lot more like the way people are actually voting and what they want and what they believe in. So the name of the game for the GOP is minority rule. And so they're trying to barricade themselves in with gerrymandering, with the Electoral College, with the voter suppression tactics, with the voter purges, and so on. And that's why we need HR 1 to have automatic voter registration, universal voter registration. I mean, it's just pathetic that in the 21st century, we still leave it to political campaigns or civil society to get people registered to vote. I mean, that should just be a clear official responsibility of the people's government.
Yeah. I welcome some more questions from attendees. If you want to shoot some questions up at me, and I can read a couple of them to the Congressman. But let me follow up on this line of conversation.
Michael, can I interrupt you just to say thank you for all of the great work that you do with the journal Democracy. I love it. And I'd like to write for it one day if I get any time.
He's written for us, folks, and he'll do it again, believe me. You're very kind. That's very nice of you. And I hope those of you who haven't looked at the journal or its website will check it out. So just following on this line of conversation, is this kind of long-term reform stuff, multi-member districts, ranked choice voting, does this get much discussion in caucus meetings, or is it something that a lot of your colleagues aren't quite focused on yet?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. Don Beyer and I, we advocated for ranked choice voting in the Democratic caucus in our election for, speaker and caucus chair and all of this.
Yeah.
And when we first did it, people were extremely skeptical. They thought that, they thought the way politicians do, there was some kind of trick afoot, and, everybody's trying to figure out what the real agenda is and everything. And, but over time now, people have really warmed up to it, and they understand the logic of it. I mean, for one thing, you don't have to have 7 ballots to get to a majority and have everybody, up at 2:30 in the morning voting, because it's all built in there, so I would say, I mean, most people are not philosophically inclined to question the modes of election that got them elected. Okay. But I think as we go on, Democrats are more and more open to it. And in fact, as we have elections around the country, or, we have initiatives or referenda on things like ranked choice voting, and people see that's where the Democrats are going, that's where young people are going, that's where independents are going. It's catching on, and I think it's coming soon.
That'd be great. Okay, a couple of attendee questions from a fellow named Michael in Washington, a fellow named Michael Kazin, in fact, in Washington. You've written a lot about DC statehood. What are the prospects of that in this Congress?
Well, the excellent in the House, we passed it in the last session, which was a thrilling thing to see that happen. I think it was kind of a breakthrough epiphany for people in Washington to see that, after so many years of people in DC talking about it, they could actually pass one of the houses, but we have to get it through the Senate, and that's the challenge. But look, we started with 13 states. We added 37 states. Like, that is the trajectory of political equality in America. That's how you gain political equality as a community. So that's why, but I'm, pushing for it, not just for DC, but for Puerto Rico as well. I mean, we got millions of disenfranchised US citizens out there, and it makes no sense. And I mean, it doesn't deal with all of the problems that the US Senate is causing for us as an impediment to political progress in the country, but it does begin to move things in the right direction to say, all right, fine. If we're going to have these, extraordinary imbalances between, North Dakota and Montana and California and New York, at least let's say, okay, if we can have smaller states, let's have a smaller state like Washington, and another medium-sized state like Puerto Rico, which is bigger, which is a population bigger than I think half of the states.
Yes, but giant South Dakota at 880,000 people says the District of Columbia is too small.
Right. I think that we are headed for a solution on that. Most states have entered the union like animals boarding Noah's Ark, in twosies, and it's Kansas, Nebraska, and Hawaii, Alaska, and I think that DC and Puerto Rico make a pretty good team, given that DC's been part of the Democratic National Platform for decades, and Puerto Rico has been part of the Republican National Platform for decades. And there is a Republican delegate, or they call her a resident commissioner, Jennifer Gonzalez from Puerto Rico. And so all the Republicans have to do is kind of step up to their own statements. And Puerto Rico and DC sounds like a good trade to me.
Oh, and by the way, just real quickly, talking about our territories and so forth. I think everybody was blown away by Stacey Plaskett, and she was a student of yours, huh? So
yeah. She
I
was my prize pupil, and she was a prosecutor for a long time. She represents the Virgin Islands, and I was very proud that we had the first non-voting delegate as a member of an impeachment team in American history. She's just a sensational lawyer. I couldn't be prouder of her. And so we're getting invited to go do, fellow manager, colleagues, and professor student act all over the country. But she has teased me mercilessly ever since I got to Congress, because she has more seniority than I do, because she was elected before me, even though she was my student.
Let's take one more viewer question, and then I'll ask a question to end it, and we'll let you go. Manju wonders, are you able to work with any Republican colleagues? Would some support election reforms?
First, I forgot to say hello to Michael Kazin. Mike, thank you for writing it. But on this question, look, I pride myself on working with Republicans. I was a state senator in Maryland for a decade. We passed marriage equality and the repeal of the death penalty and decriminalization of marijuana, all on a bipartisan basis. We had a lot of Republican support, and I'm a middle child, so I'm prone to try to bring people together anyway, But I think election reform is one of those issues conceivably that can draw some Republican support, except that the parties think in purely tactical, strategic terms about it. I'll give you an example of it. I introduced the first national popular vote legislation in America, in Maryland, when I was a state senator. And the first people who were excited about it were my Republican colleagues. And they said, this is fantastic, because we get completely ignored in Maryland during presidential campaign cycles because they know we're going to lose. So we get no help from the National Republican Party. But if every vote actually counts and you just count all the votes nationally, that's great for us. So they were all signing on to it, co-sponsoring and getting with it. And then they got the word from the RNC, no, this is not going to help us, because demographically, it's moving against us in terms of the popular vote. We want to stick with the Electoral College, and they called it off. So that's the problem. Lots of times people will say, can't you just form personal relationships with people? And you can form personal relationships with people, but at a certain point, the parties do come to stand for particular things. I'd tell you a final story about that. I had a good friend. I have a good friend named Lamar Smith, who was a congressman from Texas, and he was chair of the House Committee on Science and Technology. And one day we were sitting there and in committee and Judiciary, and I said, Lamar, we can disagree about your terrible tax plan and reproductive freedom, but you guys have got to get serious about climate change, because that is going to be the end of us all. That's going to be the end of civilization. We don't get serious about it. He said, well, Jamie, you got your scientists and we got our scientists. And I said, well, that's not really how science works, it's not like rival partisan teams. And so we were at a computer, and I took him to all the websites of the different scientific installations in my district, like the NIH and FDA and NOAA. And I said, all of them are saying the same thing. All the professional scientists agree that, climate change is real. And it's like this dagger pointed at the throat of humanity. So he said, well, I don't want to get in a big fight with you, but let me tell you this about professionals. Professionals built the Titanic, and amateurs built Noah's Ark. Okay. And so I thought about that for a second. I said, wait, you mean you want an amateur flying you back to Texas this weekend, or you got an amateur performing heart surgery on someone in your family? But anyway, so, at a certain point, you get to kind of just rock bottom differences. And one of them is about science and religion. And although I will say that he did send me a message before he retired from Congress, saying he had made a big speech about climate change, and he didn't necessarily think it was, anthropogenic, or not necessarily human caused, but that it's a reality, and so that was cool. And he also sent a check to me for $1,000 for my campaign as he closed down his account. So I appreciated that.
Well, okay. Too bad he's retired.
Yeah.
Well, listen, before we let you go, I'm sure everyone watching this is concerned as I am. How are you and your family doing?
Well, we miss Tommy terribly every single day, but we're not overcome by grief and agony the way we were at the beginning for several weeks and just unable to do anything, So in that sense, we feel a teeny bit better every day. And there have been a lot of wonderful gestures, a lot of human rights groups and animal welfare and animal rights groups have done in terms of creating scholarships and fellowships and stuff in Tommy's name. And yesterday, the Maryland General Assembly created a new program in the state where people who are having emotional or mental health crises can call in, and then they can be called on a regular basis, a daily basis, or a weekly basis by a medical person in the state. And they named it after Tommy, and that was very moving to us that they'd done something so positive in his name.
Where can people make a donation of some kind?
Well, we've set up the Tommy Raskin Memorial Fund for people and animals. It's now got more than $1 million in it from all these contributions from around the country. And it's to support the causes that were closest to him in terms of global poverty, human rights, and animal rights and welfare. And of course, he was a passionate vegan, and he wants everybody to give it a try, not to eat animals for a week. Yeah. And a lot of people will never go back. But we're collecting a book of essays and poems that he wrote. So we'll be coming out with that. And, we just want to thank everybody for taking his messages so seriously and to heart.
Well, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. Really, seriously, thank you. This is the first time we've done this. We had really terrific attendance here, and we didn't lose anybody during the course of the conversation. That's more a testament to Jamie Raskin than it is to me, obviously. But we had a nice turnout, and I hope people enjoyed the conversation. And Congressman, thank you so very much for taking time out to do this.
My pleasure, Michael. Keep up all of your awesome work, and we will be in touch.
We sure will. And everyone, thanks again, and happy Friday to everybody. Bye.